welcome Dr. Tapi for our webinar, and we would like to see more of, learn more from you today. The stage is yours, Dr. Tapasya.
Okay, okay, I'm just trying to share my screen.
Share the screen, okay.
Yeah. Just give me one moment. Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Kuldeep. Okay, yes, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks, Kuldeep, for the introduction. And thank you, everyone, for joining in on a Sunday afternoon to attend this webinar. So before we start today's webinar, I want to share a story of this very inspirational woman that I came across recently on social media. This is Harbhajan Kaur from Chandigarh. She's 94, and 4 years back when she turned 90, she felt that she'd spent her entire life, and she was a homemaker, and she was busy taking care of her home and children and husband. And her husband passed away when she was 84. And she started feeling lonely, and she also started feeling that she hadn't really done much with her life. She had never made a penny. She had not worked in her entire life. And she wanted to do something about it. Her daughter suggested, since she was a great cook, that she makes some besan barfis and pickles that she was famous for in her family. And she tried it and went and sold it in the local market. Her first earning was 2,000 rupees, and that thrilled her. She felt that even at 90, she could do something, and she could make a living for herself. Today at 94, there are days that she works from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. when she has bulk orders. She made 200 kilos of barfi for her granddaughter's wedding. And recently, Mr. Anand Mahendra called her his Entrepreneur of the Year. Why am I sharing this story with you? Is because at 90, so there's no age to realizing if you want a change in your life and to implement that. At 90, she realized that she wanted to do something, and she, did it. And even today, when her children and grandchildren ask her for guidance for their career, she say, you can do it, you can take up and do something at any age in your life. There's no age for doing something new. And change is something that is constant, right? So it's how we deal with the change. So change is the only constant in life, and one's ability to adapt to those changes will determine one's success in life. What if I told you about 6 months ago that your life would be turned upside down in the next few months? I doubt you'd be happy with the thought of this drastic change that we're all going through. But at the end of it, we're all adapting to this change, aren't we? So why be afraid of this change? We need to go through whatever the life throws at us with a very positive mindset. So today, I'm going to share how I'm implementing Invisalign to try and shift my practice from analog to digital, and how am I trying to go through this change in my orthodontic journey. Why do I speak about aligners today? Robert Keim, who's the JCO editor in 2012, nominated 2 game changers in orthodontics in the past 15 years. One was TADS and the other was Invisalign, or clear aligners. Today, I would cover this talk in the following topics. We would start with introduction, some basic principles of aligner therapy, including smart force features. I would share my digital workflow, also some cases, and if time permits, some marketing as well as Q&As. Let's talk a little bit about my old way. When I was a postgraduate almost 20 years ago, what was my way of practicing orthodontics? I was trained in beg appliance, also then moved on to a little bit of pre-adjusted edgewise appliance in my final year of post-graduation. We were doing a lot of removable appliances, removable functional appliances. The fixed functional appliances had just kind of started trickling in. I didn't do any lingual appliances, no TADs, no aligners. Over the last 20 years, we have all been changing, as technology around us is changing. Our field is adapting and getting better, and we are getting more latest appliances. So what is the new way that we are inching towards? We've moved to through a lot of self-ligating appliances, lingual appliances, customized appliances, robotically bent wires, aligners, and all sorts of things. And that is now going towards the new way of doing practice. A few months ago, this is how we would greet our friends. Who thought that we would move to something like this? But that's the new way of greeting people now. The CEO of Accenture said digital is the main reason why just over half of the companies on Fortune 500 have disappeared since the year 2000. Now, orthodontics has long enjoyed the reputation for being amongst the most progressive of dental specialties. Orthodontists were using computer technology for clinical pursuits as early as 1960s. By 1980s, Main Street orthodontists had started incorporating computer technology. Modern technology progressed orthodontics further by seamlessly integrating computer technology and digital imaging into practice, which we now call as digital orthodontics. Today, digital orthodontics or digital technology has touched on every aspect of orthodontic treatment, not just record collection or scanning, but also performing virtual treatment planning and translating these plans into execution with digitally driven appliance. And we are using CAD/CAM techniques for manufacturing anything from printed models, indirect bonding trays, custom-made brackets to robotically bent wires. It is also now becoming possible to remotely monitor treatment and control it. So we see the scanning going on. We know 3D printing is happening. We've heard a lot of webinars about metal printing that's going on, and that's the way to go. Digital radiography, scanning has replaced impressions. And of course, the treatment planning, which is done digitally, is now providing us a new level of accuracy. So before we move forward, I'd like to do a small poll. I hope you can share the poll with the participants. Just yes and no. So the first question is, have you used any clear aligners in your practice or college? You could mark yes or no. And the second question is, have you used the Invisalign aligners? Okay, I think we can close the poll, and if I can, yeah, you can see an answer to that.
I'm sharing the results.
Okay, sure, whenever you get. Okay, so that's interesting. I know we have a lot of postgraduates with us here today, and majority of you have not used any clear aligners in college or practice, and of course, even a bigger majority have not used the Invisalign aligners. So great. So I have a lot of information today. And let's move on, and let me try and give you some basics on how aligners work, because it's not the same as braces. Okay, Satrishi, yes, I have it here. So what's the first difference between aligners and fixed orthodontic appliances? Aligners work by applying a pushing force. That means your pushing force is applied against the tooth surface by the aligners. Whereas fixed appliances work by applying a pulling force on the tooth, right? So that's the first difference. So when aligners, how do the aligners apply force? Is not, they don't force, they obviously apply force directly on the tooth anatomy, but to improve the direction and the direction of force, there's something called as attachments, which are active surfaces which are bonded onto the tooth, through which the plastic directs force to the teeth. The second difference is that with aligners, multiple tooth movements can take place at the same time. For example, if there is sufficient overjet, elastic wear can start from the first stage of treatment. For deep bite cases, you don't have to wait till the bite opens before bonding or starting lower arch treatment, but you can start from day one. Alignment, rotation, torque, that means multiple movements can be done at the same time with the use of aligners. Also, the material that the aligners, and specifically the SmartTrack material that Invisalign is made up of, delivers more constant force. So it's not a very high force which then tracks down to a low force. It's more constant, regular force. Also with aligners, with braces, you know that you either have braces on the labial or on the lingual. So the braces are in contact with usually one surface. Whereas With aligners, you have multiple tooth surfaces which are in contact with aligners at any time. With the aligner materials wrapping around the tooth surface, and then the smart force features that we would come to, like the attachments and pressure areas, forces can be applied precisely to generate the correct moment to force ratios. You can also be selective as to which teeth you want to move. So the aligner can use the entire arch as anchorage to move one or two teeth. For example, when you're distalizing a second molar, you can just distalize one tooth using the rest of the arch as anchorage. An open bite can be treated by programming anterior extrusion along with posterior intrusion in some cases, or maybe if you don't want anterior extrusion, you can only build in posterior intrusion. The movements can be staged according to your preferences, that if you do want to do anterior alignment first, you can choose to do that. Whereas with fixed appliances, it could be more challenging to move individual teeth and prevent unwanted tooth movement. Of course, like any appliance, aligners also require anchorage, but the anchorage segments are predetermined and they can be changed throughout treatment. For example, again in distalization, when you're distalizing the molars, the anterior segment is the anchorage. And when you have distalized the molars and the premolars, the posterior segment becomes the anchorage, and that's used for moving the anterior teeth. Therefore, you can plan the anchorage throughout treatment and the segments can be changed, and therefore you have good anchorage control. So basically what you need to know is when you're looking at fixed appliances, the arch wires are the source of the force. The brackets serve as handles or purchase points, and the medium that transmits the force from the wire to the tooth. The elastics or the bracket doors engage the wire within the bracket slot. Therefore, brackets provide a two-point contact that allows controlled crown and root tooth movement. Whereas with aligners, there is a two-point contact of the plastic through attachments and aligner features. They both give us combined control over the tooth and the root movement. What are some of the clinical benefits of using Invisalign in your practice? Like I initially started with, this is more of a digitally designed appliance. Most aligners are digitally designed appliances, which means you do a 3D treatment planning for every patient, which is not something that you do for a braces patient. There is a precise design of movements and final tooth position. You are able to maintain more hygiene. And there's obviously a reduced risk of decalcification when you're following protocols. Of course, one of the main benefits is aligners are barely visible. And that's one of the reasons for the huge popularity of aligners over fixed braces. Some of the non-clinical benefits for patients, like I said, it's an aesthetic option. It's comfortable, removable. You can maintain good hygiene. There is a minimum impact on lifestyle. You can visualize treatment goals. And for your practice, less chairs at time, fewer emergencies, greater number of referrals. And I should add to that, in an unprecedented situation like a pandemic, when your patients are unable to come for follow-ups. There's been 3 months since I've seen most of my patients who are on braces. They're having problems, or even if everything is okay, the treatment's kind of halted. That doesn't happen with aligners. Your treatment's going on. All the patient has to do is come and collect their trays from the clinic. We don't have to really see them. What I do is a virtual consult with them, which I will come to in a bit, and just try and track their appointments and track their progress. So that's a big benefit if I look at the current scenario, because you have minimum office visits. Even in the non-pandemic situation, you may have patients who don't live in your city. They may have children living in boarding or colleges, and you can do treatments long distance, obviously provided the patient is very compliant. So all in all, this is a digital orthodontic system starting from collection of data to the analysis, to the planning and the fabrication. There are a combination of innovations in the product which improves predictability. We will come to each of these. You have the smart force features, the material that it's made of, and the technology. So what are the smart force features that we are talking about? There are two of those. They are altered aligner geometry. That means there are some changes or some grooves or some marks made on the plastic. And then there are attachments, which are composite buttons that are bonded on certain teeth to help with more predictable movement. And the aligners apply force systems either individually or in segments to achieve the desired treatment outcomes. These are automatically placed by the software. So I, as a doctor, cannot ask for a smart force feature. what the softwares do after a lot of calculations based on what you have asked for is they analyze and see what smart force feature, if at all, is required for a certain movement, and then it is placed by the software. So, like I said, this is like a tab that you see on the software, which would tell you what are your attachments, what are the cuts, the blue are the cuts, the pink are the attachments, which are basically composite buttons, which are placed on the teeth. And these are automatically placed also based on the doctor's clinical preferences. So these are the aligner features: attachments, power ridges, which I will come to in a bit. In mixed dentition, you have eruption pontics when you have permanent teeth which are yet to erupt. You have eruption tabs again in children where the second molars probably have not fully erupted and you need a guidance. You have pressure points. You have precision cuts for elastics. You have deep bite ramps which help in bite opening. There's something like an anterior bite plane. And you also have deep bite pressure areas which you can barely see. I'll share a little bit about the smart force features. Power ridge is an aligner feature, the shape of which has been engineered to apply torque. We are always struggling with torque with our fixed appliances. It's the same with Invisalign or with aligners. You need to have a feature which helps you with getting the right torque. So what does a power ridge do? It's like a groove here, right close to the gingival margin, almost at the top of, right next to the gingival margin, you can say, which presses or puts a force, the F1 is placed through the power ridge. So it provides a favorable moment to force ratio to accomplish incisor torque when lingual root movement, because of which lingual root movement is produced. The power ridges are then also, so they are used for lingual root torque, and they produce a force and moment for lingual root torque. What is the trigger? Now, like I said, we cannot ask for these, but whenever there is 3 degrees or more of lingual root torque triggered in a case, the power ridge is automatically placed by the software. And every stage or every aligner would give you 1 degree maximum of lingual root torque. What is the lingual power ridge? Now, you see another line on the lingual side. When you want to torque along with retraction of the incisors, like for example in an extraction case, along with the labial power ridge, you also have a lingual power ridge, which helps in providing the torque while retracting and minimize the tipping. Some of the other features, like I told you, are the button cutouts. This is for putting a bondable button, and you have the hooks where you don't need to put a button. The precision bite ramps are something like an anterior bite plane. So when the patient bites, there's a posterior disocclusion. They help in bite opening or eruption of the premolars and the molars. And there's something called the pressure area, which is also automatically triggered when more than 0.5 millimeters of absolute intrusion is planned. So to provide force, which is then directed through the long axis of the teeth. A little bit on attachments. Attachments can either be conventional or optimized. We more commonly have the optimized attachments now, but sometimes you also see these conventional attachments. So conventional are the original attachments that were initially designed with Invisalign, and they were more bulky. They were either rectangular, horizontal, vertical, ellipsoidal. They were standard shapes, and they were passive. They were not active, and they were usually placed in the center of the clinical crown. Whereas what is used more often now is the optimized attachments. These are custom designed. They are activated. They're usually smaller in size than the conventional ones. You see, they're more rounded, and they're all different shapes. Their placement is determined by the software. So, and they all, like I said, all attachments help with the predictability of certain movements. So, of course, this is when you're getting into depth, you need to look at your plan and see what is the purpose of each attachment. Do you have a movement that's happening where you need an attachment according to you, but there is no attachment present? So you need to look at all these points when you're looking into your treatment plans. Again, something like a premolar extraction case. On your left is the conventional attachments, which are positioned initially, like in the early stages when Invisalign was getting developed. So you had these long vertical attachments, and there would be some tipping, and you had to, so there was no way to avoid that. But then with the G6 premolar, this is the G6 premolar extraction protocol of attachments for first premolar extraction. You have these root uprighting attachments. So there is a tipping when there's distal force, and then the attachment here helps in root uprighting. So there's a little tipping and then there's uprighting. So as you see, these are completely designed according to the case requirement. And of course, there's something called as an activation of an attachment, which means that on your left is the actual size of the attachment that is bonded on the tooth, but on your right is the aligner shape. So what that means is the attachment in the plastic or your aligner is not the exact same shape or size as the actual attachment that is bonded on the tooth. And the difference between this size helps in the activation. So you have a bigger size pressing onto this. So that's what gives the force, and there's a space, for example, in an extrusion, there's a space below this into which the tooth moves. So it's not exactly the same thing. So if you look at this picture, this is the actual template or the actual size of the attachment, and that's the shape in the plastic. And that is what provides the activation. So I'll just tell you a little bit about how these attachments work. They all have an active surface on which the force is applied. For example, this is like an extrusion attachment and this is like a rotation attachment. So the force is applied perpendicular to these active surfaces. This is an optimized attachment for extrusion. Okay, so that's the attachment surface. That's the active surface that engages the aligner. That means you have a little space below it. Like I said, that space is bigger than the actual attachment. So the aligner actually applies force to this active surface. And the orientation of this active surface is fixed with respect to the long axis. This provides a low continuous extrusive force and helps to extrude this tooth. This is automatically placed when there's an extrusion of more than 0.5 millimeter detected. For rotation, the active surface is usually off the axis, it's not in the middle. It's on the side where you need to rotate the tooth. This position is tested for interferences, and there is a vertical component and which is to resist the intrusion tendency. If you know that a lot of times when in aligners, if anyone's used aligners, when you're trying to de-rotate a tooth, a lot of times if there's no attachment, the tooth can simply intrude. So there is a vertical component to resist this intrusion. And these are automatically shaped and positioned for canines and premolars. And they're positioned when there's more than 5 degrees of rotation planned. Similarly, there are many more attachments, and we cannot go into in depth, but just to give you an idea of what goes into the smart force features of Invisalign. What about aligner products? Now, a few years back, there were some aligner products, and I don't know if now also we have some that don't use attachments at all. So in Angle Orthodontics, there was a study that was published in 2015 in which there was a finite element analysis of a plastic aligner system, which said that biomechanically supplementary composite attachments generate the force systems required to bodily produce tooth movements. The absence of biomechanically supplementary composite attachments favors the undesired inclination of tooth during translation movement. So specifically when you need a lot of control over the tooth in the root, you must have an attachment on that tooth. One of the other things that comes along with the smart force features when you're working on a case is the tooth movement assessment. So the software based on the movements that have been programmed would tell you if there are some movements which are moderate, that means the blue movements are seen by the blue dots on the picture, or there are some movements which are black, which are advanced movements. So if a movement is beyond a certain degree or certain millimeter, they would categorize it for you. What does that mean? Blue movements mean so for both blue and black, you need very close monitoring. Blue means that most of the time those movements will track, but you need to do good monitoring and the patient needs to be very compliant. Whereas with black movements, sometimes you need auxiliaries. You might need elastics. You might need sectional braces. There might be some very difficult movements. So you know upfront when you're starting a case, which are your difficult movements and you keep a track on them. So a few years back, that was the old way. I'm sure most of us are not using headgears now, but of course we are still using braces. I still use braces. But yes, we are moving towards the new way, the digital way of doing treatment. So let's now talk a little bit about what are the cases and how do we define cases within Invisalign. Okay, so like I said, they're blue and black movements. So you do have the basic simple type of cases, which are your initiator cases. And then you move on to intermediate as well as advanced cases. Initiator cases are simple spacing, crowding, orthodontic relapse cases, some deep bites, some anterior cross bites, maybe single or two teeth, and when there's some amount of expansion. Intermediate cases would mean severe deep bites, significant amount of spacing and crowding, maybe lower incisor extraction cases, open bites, severe deep bites, end-on class 2s requiring distalization, posterior cross bites, and advanced cases could be class 2, class 3 cases, premolar extraction cases, and cases requiring a lot of translation. So what could initiator case look like? Like I said, a deep bite of up to 4 millimeters, mild to moderate crowding and spacing, anterior cross bite, expansion, and relapse. Intermediate cases, significant spacing and crowding, lower incisor extraction, severe deep bites, posterior cross bites, class 2, or an end-on molar, not a full class 2, requiring distalization, or maybe even a pre-surgical alignment. Advanced cases could be class 2, class 3, severe open bites, very severe deep bites, also extraction cases. So what are your options? As with all aligner companies, Invisalign gives you some options which you can choose for. And this is just to know what kind of a case your patient's case could fall into. So you have a category of 7 aligners, which is the express package. You have a light package of up to 14 aligners, a moderate package of up to 26 aligners, a comprehensive package of unlimited aligners. And Vivera retainers are nothing but a set of retainers that Invisalign you can opt to order from Invisalign. So what are the details? What do you mean by 7 aligners? As you can understand, 7 aligners is something that is for a patient that requires only about 3 months of treatment. And that would be very, very minor orthodontic relapse. I mean, most people would have done very, very few express cases. But when you have a single tooth or 2 teeth that need a little alignment, partial treatments, very, very, very mild crowding and spacing. And of course, you can do full arch. But usually it's for social 6 or premolar to premolar teeth movement. Light cases would be aesthetic. Correction again mild crowding and spacing, usually class 1 corrections, no class 2, class 3s, non-extraction, and maybe some pre-restorative. Up to 2 millimeters of AP correction could be possible. Moderate package gives you up to 26 aligners, and you can do mild to moderate AP corrections, mild to moderate crowding and spacing, and pre-restorative. Also, you could do like a half class 2, like an end-on, pseudo class 3, and pre-restorative work. About 4 millimeters of AP correction might be possible. Comprehensive packages give you unlimited aligners, and so for all your complex cases with premolar extractions, for full class 2s, class 3s, severe open bites, deep bites, there's no limit. You can order as many aligners as you want. So now moving on to what's the kind of movement that is possible per aligner. So there is a certain amount of movement, like when we do fixed braces, we call the patient once in 4 weeks, and we say 1 millimeter of tooth movement per month. So with aligners, the linear movement possible is 0.25 millimeter per aligner. There's a rotation of 2 degrees per aligner possible, and a lingual root torque of 1 degree per stage that is built in. What are the default parameters for predictable movement? That means which are the movements that can, they'll comfortably happen using aligners. If you have less than 2 millimeters of anterior intrusion, and I'm talking about only aligners without any adjuncts or auxiliaries. For extrusion, about 1 to 2 millimeters per arch, incisor rotation of less than 45 degrees, expansion of 2 to 3 millimeters per quadrant, distalization of up to 3 millimeters in the upper arch. Mesialization is less predictable, so 1 to 2 millimeters per arch, and proclination considering bone limits. Let's move on to the digital workflow. What do we mean by a digital workflow? Which means we are trying to move from a workflow which was primarily analog, starting from alginate impressions to bonding directly on the patient's teeth manually, to calling them for physical checkups, and so on. Now with the COVID scenario, even the consultations have moved to a virtual setup. So starting with the consultation, which could initially be a virtual consultation followed by a face-to-face, wherein you would do records, you would do an intraoral scan if possible, and diagnose and treatment plan the case. Next step would be a ClinCheck plan review. What that means, what is a ClinCheck plan? ClinCheck plan is nothing but a 3D treatment plan. It's the name of a 3D treatment plan that is developed for an Invisalign case, which is done before ordering for your aligners. The third step is when your aligners come in, and that's when you need to get the patient into your practice, is the insertion appointment. And then you do have adjustment appointments. Once you finish your first set of aligners, if you need more, then you have additional aligner records or scans, insertion, adjustment, post-treatment records, and then retention. So that was the old way, or I would say about 3 months ago. That's how we would consult. We would get the patient in, see the patient for almost 1 hour in the clinic, and show them everything. If patient was interested, for most of the patients, we would do an intraoral scan and explain the whole procedure and the process. But what have we been doing in the last 3 months? This is the Invisalign virtual appointment. So Invisalign has developed a Zoom video conferencing or video consulting platform, through which we can do a virtual appointment with either our existing patients or potentially new consults. So what do we tell the patient? We tell the patient to take these kind of selfies and then send it to us through email before we actually plan the appointment. And then we do a virtual face-to-face appointment where we can show them similar cases, treated like theirs. We, of course, explain the whole process, the payments, and so on. Now, what does this do? Even though you open your practice post-COVID, you want to minimize the number of people walking into your practice. This is a good tool if you have done a virtual appointment. You are giving a lot of information to the patient before they actually step in. And maybe they're even prepared to come in and do a scan when they're coming in to see you. So it does minimize office visits and helps you do new patient consults. And like I said, you can also do follow-ups for your existing patient. So you have to, how does this work? You call your doctor for an appointment, and the doctor's office books an appointment. There's a platform that you log into, and it's very streamlined. You get an email to log in, the patient gets an email confirmation, and 15 minutes before the appointment, you get another email where you just click on join the appointment, and just like the Zoom meeting, you are logged into your patient. So, like I said, that's the new way of doing the appointments and consults now. One other digital tool which you can use to explain the whole process to your patient, which we were before using in the clinic and now we are using through virtual appointments, is the HCP consult tool. So what is this tool? It helps and tells the patient the whole process of Invisalign. And I'm going to just play a short video. This is a tool. You can open it on your desktop or your iPad. One by one. So, for example, the first detail you will see what next. You tell them what's important to you. or a spacing case, you can show them before and after the exams. And if you don't have multiple cases, you can also switch to Invisalign cases and open any of these narrow pieces that are kind of mentioned here and show them just before and after. So visualization is very important for a patient to understand what kind of improvement they're looking at. And also you can fill in your own personal information on your practice, on your staff. So it can be very personalized. And also the cost. Now that's a big factor when because that aligners cost much more than this. So there's a calculator in it. So for example, if you charging actually dividing for it's not 5,000. So you're actually kind of breaking up the whole cost and sharing it so they understand what the benefits are. And this may not be that expensive if you're looking at the whole duration. So that is the HCP tool that we do use in the practice. And then what's the next thing? Once the consultation, initial consultation and information has been given to the patient, we come to the record keeping or the impressions. Of course, we know this is something that we've been doing for so many years. But what we are now moving towards is the scanning. But what are the limitations of these analog records? Of course, there is a cost of material involved, including impression stone models. There is storage space needed. You need more time when you take impressions and convert them into models. The patient experience may not be always pleasant. We know we see a lot of gagging with patients, and I don't know any patient who really likes getting an alternate impression or the previous impression done. There could be fit issues, and it does take longer to fabricate appliances. And of course, today you also have to be very careful about disinfecting your impressions. So the new way is by using intraoral scans. So now I'll tell you a little bit about digital scanning and how it helps to develop your practice and bring about more efficiency into your practice as well as improve patient experience. So this is the scanner that I have, but of course there are lots of good scanners available in the market. This is the iTero scanner. And what do I see after I've started using the scanner is there's more case acceptance. When a patient sees their scans on the screen and sees what kind of treatment result we can get for them within about 10 minutes of doing the scan, they are very motivated, and also it's easier for them to accept the treatment. You can also track progress using this, and you can make a plan faster. So what is this image shows you the occlusogram. So this has a feature which shows you the heavy contacts. So there are a lot of adults who come in for an Invisalign consult or even for other reasons. And if you show them the occlusogram, which will show them if they have a traumatic bite, what are the kind of bite forces that are present, and that could be just simply a reason for them to think of getting this corrected. The other thing you can see in the scanner, by using a scan, is the time lapse. Now, if you see this image, you can see the gingival recession. Now, that is when you do 2 scans over a period of time. So if I did a scan today and I called in a patient after 6 months or a year, if there is a reason for, maybe the bite is bad or the gum health is not good, if there is a session that has happened in those last 6 to 12 months, you can compare the 2 scans, and the time-lapse feature would show you if there has been any worsening of the dentition, whether it's recession, whether it's bruxism, whether it's tooth wear. So that is again a very good feature to explain to the patient. What is the time-lapse feature? Again, it shows if any tooth movement has happened over the time since you did the last scan. So you need to not just tell your patients why they need treatment, you need to show them why they need treatment. So just a quick video of how we do the scan. There's a disposable cover sleeve that goes over the scan one, and you start scanning. You scan one arch first, then the opposing arch, and then you also scan the bite of the patient. And the patient can see the scan images popping up on the screen in front of them. That's the bite that we register. And then we explain the occlusal gram and explain to them what are the bite, what are the bite forces, is there a traumatic bite involved or not. So that was the scanning process. Now coming to another tool that we use quite often is the photo uploader. Now when you want to submit a case, we use something called as the photo uploader. I know traditionally we take photographs and then we upload them onto the computer and then use them to submit a case to Invisalign. What you can do with the photo uploader is directly submit a prescription or the patient's case directly to the so you can take pictures that you want the standard photograph, 6 extra or 5 extra hours. You can click and then submitting it directly through this software. And not just you, I mean, any of your staff can do it. If you have an associate doctor, it's very, very easy and simple. And you're saving time because you're directly uploading it onto the software.
Tapasya, can you reduce the volume of your videos, please? Yeah, no, you'll have to mute it, I think, because we don't get to hear your voice.
Okay, all right, understood. Okay. Okay, so one more thing, one more digital feature that we are using is the outcome simulator. So now when you have you've done the scan, so the patient understands what's the problem, but you're now moving to showing them what could be the possible result of treatment, which is called as the outcome simulator. Now you can do this you can generate a simulated outcome within about 5 minutes of doing the scan. And this is a big patient converter. Almost 7 out of 10 patients say yes after seeing their simulation. Now the other thing that you can do is you can also adjust outcomes. So the outcome is generated by the software automatically. For example, you would need to put in your treatment goals and say, okay, I want to do IPR for this patient, or I don't want to do IPR and I want to do extraction. So you can show the patient multiple options. So for example, this is a lower IPR option. And now we're showing the second option of the patient where we're removing, for example, just for this patient, hypothetically removing the lower incisor and not doing any IPR. So, you can update the simulation and then show them a second plan. So even before, starting a case, you can show a patient what kind of a result they might get, because there are patients who say, I don't know how it's going to look if I extract teeth, or I don't know how much correction I can get if I just did some IPR. So this is just a visualization tool, which is also part of the outcome simulator, which would show us what's the difference if, for example, I had 2 different treatment plans for the same patient. Okay, now coming to another digital feature, which is the ClinCheck, which we were talking about before, and the 3D controls in the ClinCheck. So what is the ClinCheck? ClinCheck is nothing but the 3D treatment plan, which is made for every patient before we process and place the order for the aligners. Now, this is a powerful treatment planning tool, and it simulates your tooth movement sequence into the final occlusion. And we do get some 3D controls, which the doctor has control over, and the doctor can use the 3D controls to modify the end result, or maybe modify a tooth movement, and then submit the case. So look at it this way. Now, if I'm comparing aligners with fixed appliances, your teeth with their attachments are nothing but your braces. Your entire series of aligners, you could visualize that as the world's most super elastic full-size arch wire tied into all brackets on day 1 and never changed through treatment until you go to the next set of aligners. So that's how you can imagine between braces and aligners. Now, what is your ClinCheck plan? Now, ClinCheck plan is your arch wire design, which helps us to achieve that ideal clinical outcome. it is not the ideal clinical outcome in itself. So if I look at my ClinCheck plan, it should, in a lot of cases, it may not look like an ideal occlusion. Now, for example, let me tell you, if I had to open a bite for a patient with braces, I would put in maybe a reverse curve of SPI. So my reverse curve of SPI wire is my ClinCheck plan. But what do I get? I don't get a reverse curve in my teeth. I get a leveled curve of SPI. So that's what the ClinCheck plan is for us. Now, there's been studies which actually compared between predicted and actual end of treatment occlusion. So what they found out that ClinCheck models do not accurately reflect the patient's final occlusion. And compared with the patient models taken immediately after treatment, the ClinCheck models overestimated alignment, buccolingual inclinations, occlusal contacts, and occlusal relation. That means you need to build in some movements in your ClinCheck plan so that you get the right amount of movement in the patient. So over-engineering the ClinCheck plan is a must. Now that's like an overcorrection, or like I said, a reverse curve of SPI built into a patient with a severe deep bite. So what are the malocclusions or the movements where you do need to over-engineer your ClinCheck? Is overbites, tip, torque, and even expansion. For example, one of my patients, I would show you. So my first planner, he had rotated incisors, which I call it butterfly incisors. So my first ClinCheck plan showed very well aligned central incisors, but they were still slightly rotated at the end of the first cell. My second ClinCheck plan, I overcorrected the rotation on the central incisor, and this is how they landed up. So you need to build in overcorrections for some of these movements. Now, what does a ClinCheck plan look like? You can see it step by step, but this is a video of a ClinCheck plan. And what would it show you is all the aligner features, including attachments. It will show you how your teeth are moving, what is the IPR that you've built in. And for example, if it's an extraction case, are you doing a lot of retraction? Is it a mild, is it a moderate, or is it a high anchorage case? So just to show you a little bit about the 3D controls and so just to tell you what kind of control the doctor has on doing the treatment planning. So there are all these features here. This is the superimposition feature, which would show me my movements that have been programmed in a case. That's the grid, which would tell me what are the kind of linear movements that have been planned. For example, amount of intrusion or extrusion planned in a case. The attachments would show me what attachments are already placed. And if I do want to change my attachments, or if I want to, remove an attachment which I feel is not necessary, or if I want to add an attachment. So attachment gives me the flexibility of adding, but you can only add those big conventional attachments. You cannot add optimized attachments because that's generated by the software. The next would be the IPR. And you could actually, sometimes you see there's been IPR being done for no reason. You can actually remove it, or if you feel there's a need for an IPR, you can even add an IPR between two teeth. And then, of course, there's tooth movement assessment, which would tell you if it's a blue movement or if it's a black movement. And you can also look at the movements table, which tells you what's the amount of translation, rotation, angulation, or inclinations that have been built into a case. You can also open it and look at the overjet and overbite, which is initial, or the final, which has been given by the computer, or if you have done any changes, and what's the doctor's final. There's also the arch width. You can look at the occlusal plane and you can modify the occlusal plane. You can also switch on the tooth numbering, and this is the tooth movement. So if I want to add torque, I can select my teeth and I can select the movement and I can add torque. Now that's an overcorrection again that I built into this case. So you can also at the end of it look at your occlusal contacts. So if this means very heavy contacts, do I want to reduce my contacts? Then I intrude these incisors. So you can look at an array of features which will help you plan your case better and minimize the involvement of the technician who is making the treatment plan for you. Okay, and then one last feature of the scanner, if you're doing multiple scans for a patient, then you look at the progress assessment. So for example, if I have done, this is my start of treatment, and this is at the end of my first set of aligners. If I use the progress assessment feature, it will tell me which teeth are tracking, by the green color, which are not tracking, and some which may be going in the opposite direction of movement. So that is called as the progress assessment. So through this whole series of features, starting right from a virtual appointment, the HCP tool, the scan, the photo uploader, outcome simulator, the ClinCheck plan, the progress assessment, and eventually at the end of treatment, the Vivera retainers, you have a whole digital workflow mapped out for you. One of the new things that just interestingly came out recently during the lockdown is the Invisalign app, which now the patients can download, and it has a lot of features to keep them connected, and they can also take selfies and share them with their doctors. So let's start a little bit on the case sharing now. I know I've given you a lot of information on the digital part. So I will share some cases in each category. Express, like I said, is very, very minor movements. It's only first premolar to first premolar. You get only 7 aligners. So you can imagine the degree of movement that is possible with 7 aligners. 27-year-old female, very mild crowding. And these are the only kind of cases you can actually pick up for a 7 aligner case. So there are people who may not even notice, but she did not like this incisor, rotated lateral incisor in the upper anterior teeth. And that was the predicted outcome in the ClinCheck. On the right side, the left is pre-treatment, and that was her post-treatment. The good thing is that 7 aligners, if the patient is compliant, it will be done in 7 aligners if the plan shows it in almost all the patients. Of course, you need very good compliance, because if the patient didn't wear even 1 aligner well, you may not get that result. So this case took about 12 weeks. Now the 7 aligners, just minor spacing, upper arch relapse case, space closure, and slight amount of extrusion of the anteriors and lower anterior alignment in this case. So what is the next option? So we spoke about a very limited option, which is the express. Now we're going to the light option, which is any movements that are achievable within 14 aligners. If I convert it to months, it's roughly about 5 months to 6 months of treatment. Now what you get in 14 aligners is you get what's possible in 14, but you can order for one more set of another 14 aligners for just finishing. Like if you had to close a space and you feel it can be closed more, you can order a second set, which is part of your plan. But you cannot ask for further movement. You can do single arch movements. And so this kind of case is again for mild crowding, spacing, some amount of orthodontic relapse, about 2 millimeters of AP correction. And you can also do this as combination. Like sometimes you want to do braces in the lower and you have mild alignment in the upper. You have more complex or deep bite correction. So you can do low braces, upper light plan. So you can do combination plans also with this. So mild to moderate crowding up to 3.5 millimeters and spacing up to 3.5 millimeters and up to about 30 degrees of rotation is possible. A 32-year-old female with just spacing, some amount of bimax, proclination, and some amount of increased overbite. So this took about 6 months. We were doing 2-week change at that point. And that's how she looked at the end of 14 aligners. No refinement was also done for this patient, as she was happy with the result. Now, another tool in the ClinCheck is, like I showed you, the superimposition and the grid. The superimposition would show you the amount of movement in linear that you've planned. And the grid would show you the amount of linear movement, and superimposition would show you the change from before to after treatment. So that was the comparison for this patient. And she was a happy patient. Another case in progress, open bite, 14 aligners. At the end of 5 months, which is the end of the first set, this is how she looked. Now, of course, it's not a very severe open bite, which is why we decided to go with a short plan. But aligners generally are very good with open bite patients, open bite cases, because they help or they naturally bring about posterior intrusion. So open bites are one of the best cases to treat. In fact, you can even see some of the posterior intrusion here. Of course, this case is not finished yet, but at the end of it, most of that settles down. Again, another progress case, anterior crossbite, about 5 months, and then this patient moved away, so we could not follow her up. But we were able to correct the crossbite. Now, you also need to know that aligners also work like a bite plane. So they actually help well with crossbite correction and anterior crossbite correction, where you need to disocclude the bite to jump the bite. And then she needed an extrusion attachment because there was some extrusion needed on that too. A deep bite patient. Now, we don't always get very good bite correction. It could take time, but this, and especially in a much older patient. But this patient is 53 years old, and he said whatever you can open the bite, it wasn't a big concern for him, and he wanted his canine extruded and some of the crowding corrected. So we did decide to start this also as a light case. There was a severe deep bite, but in 14 aligners, we saw major correction in his overbite. He was a very, very compliant patient. And also there was extrusion of the canines, needed some more work. But what we were happy about was this was the predicted correction, and his result at the end of 14 aligners at 5 months was very similar, except for just the canine extrusion, which we knew we need more aligners for. But I was happy with the bite correction. So if you have a good patient and you plan the case well, you can get fairly good amount of correction in much older people as well. And that's what you see pre-treatment, and that's the kind of bite that has already been bite opening that's already been achieved in 14 aligners. So another study that was done showed that Invisalign treatment can successfully resolve mandibular arch crowding using a combination of expansion, IPR, and proclination. Where there is less than 6 millimeter of crowding, lower incisor position remains relatively stable, right? But if it's more severely crowded, you may have to think of maybe an incisor extraction or other methods of gaining space. Now, what is a light partial? A partial case would mean a case which cannot be fully, in which you cannot achieve correction fully in that many number of aligners, but you still decide to go with it. So this 34-year-old male had severe crowding, and he did not want to spend over a certain amount and at that point, we didn't even have the moderate option. So, he said, if I can just get alignment, I'm okay if I don't get perfect uprighting of some teeth. So that was the predicted outcome in 14 aligners. And why was it a light partial? Was because his lower canines, we were not able to achieve full uprighting of the lower canines. But he said, I'm okay with that. And maybe if needed, we can go in for braces at some point. So the second set of aligners comes back automatically. You don't have any control over ordering or doing changes in the ClinCheck plan. And this was his post-treatment. It took about 11 months. We used 2 sets of aligners. And like I said, there was still some uprighting and correction of the lower canines, which was left, but he was very happy and he did not want braces or any further work after this. And that's what a partial case means. A comparison of treatment impacts on Invisalign aligner and fixed appliances during the first week of treatment showed that the adults treated with Invisalign aligners experienced less pain and fewer negative impacts on their lives during the first week of orthodontic treatment than did those treated with fixed appliances. So this just tells you the impact that a clear appliance would have on a lifestyle, especially for adult patients. Coming to some moderate cases, this is a pre-restorative case, like a class 3 anterior crossbite, missing upper lateral incisors. And we wanted to open space for implants here because she was already like an anterior crossbite. So I couldn't have closed the space because she already had a distant profile. This was almost at the end of the first set of aligners. And then we ordered for additional aligner. She's almost at the end of this. I haven't been able to see her recently, but this is when I saw her last. And we have opened a fair bit of space on both sides. So this is end of set 1. And on the right is the ClinCheck plan that was programmed initially to just show you the comparison between and show you the predictability of the plan. And you can see a lot of long attachment, and that's because we need almost like translation for this patient. So we need more control over movements. Another moderate case, 55-year-old male, narrow arches, some amount of crowding, a little bit of cant, a little increased overbite in one side, on the left side. And, he also needed 1 additional set. Most of these patients need at least 2 sets of aligners. But what we did achieve was, this is the end of additional aligners. So just before retainers, we did achieve cant correction. We did achieve a fair bit of expansion of the arches. It's obviously dental expansion because he's 55, but we were happy with the amount of expansion that we could get, and alignment as well as cant correction. So about 26 aligners plus another 15 aligners for this patient. Another moderate case in treatment, wanted to show you the amount of expansion that's possible. She's a 30-year-old female. At the end of the first set of aligners, this is how much she had expanded. Again, you can see she's a good case for dental expansion. So it was obviously purely dental expansion, but also severely rotated incisor, which was almost aligned. Again, a very compliant patient. Good amount of arch development is seen. If you see the dates, it's almost like I think about 8-9 months of treatment. So April 2019, this was second scan was done in Jan 2020. So I haven't again seen her after this, but she's almost finishing with her final set. So how do you gain space? We did speak about, there was an article I spoke about. So there are 3 methods of gaining space in a non-extraction case. So first is expansion. Aligners are generally good with expansion, and you would mostly get good expansion where you already have narrow arches and narrow smiles, especially in non-growing patients. And that will help us to give space to resolve the crowding, or if there's lingually tipped in posterior teeth. What are some of the contraindications where you should be wary of doing expansion is when you have gingival recession or prominent root position and your arches are broad to begin with. So in some cases, you can gain space by proclination. And the indication for that could be when you have retrocline incisors. Some of the contraindications again would be gingival recession or a protrusive dentition or a protrusive soft tissue profile to begin with. Retraction is again indication is long clinical crowns where you have a lot of tooth show and flared incisors, and contraindication would be when you already have an existing flat profile. Anterior intrusion up to 2.5 millimeters is possible, but true intrusion is less predictable than relative intrusion, and relative intrusion is mostly beneficial or can be done when you have slightly tipped in incisors and you can afford to procline them and help that also intrude them simultaneously. A little bit about IPR. I know a lot of people think that aligners means you have to do a lot of interproximal reduction, but that is not the. So what is the IPR really needed for? It helps us to give some amount of space to resolve crowding and protrusion, right? And which you can get by expansion, proclination. And the third method, so how Invisalign follows it is first, it is the amount of expansion that's asked for or prescribed, then procline, and the last thing is to IPR. And that also if it's the doctor's clinical preference. So many cases can be treated without IPR. It is up to the doctor. They don't want you to do IPR for Invisalign. It's what you ask for. The doctors are responsible for determining whether it's more aesthetic during treatment and it preserves the intercanine bone. But on the other hand, you have a lot of advantages to extraction where you need to extract. It corrects greater space deficiencies, limits the amount of posterior expansion. Your contact also immediately after IPR, which is something that we do a lot. But if the patients are exposed to fluoridated water and fluoride containing toothpaste, you may not even need that. So you don't do IPR in very narrow teeth which are already thin and narrow to begin with or are sensitive, but you could consider IPR for triangular teeth, which when they align, especially when they give you black triangles to resolve crowding and reduce the black triangles. That's how the IPR chart comes in with your Invisalign case, and it'll tell you what stage you need to do the IPR. There are several tools available for IPR, starting from the simple strip. You need to use a gauge to measure your space created. You can have IPR burrs, you have discs, and of course you can put the patient on a fluoride rinse. You should contact your floss when you're doing IPR, and you can use diamond strips, you can use these discs. If you're very confident, you can also use these burrs, and you need to use a gauge to check the accuracy of your IPR. You need to be very, very careful and you can choose what works best for you. Another adult patient, a comprehensive case now with a deep bite and a cant, anterior cant, and obviously he had many more aligners to help intrude and upright and correct the talk on these cases. In about 40 aligners at the end of his first set, this is how the cant correction happens. Just a simple case that I want to show you to see cant correction with aligners. And you can see one of the incisors was obviously short, and we are aligning the gingival margins here, which is why the incisal edges don't look leveled. A lower incisor extraction case, wherein the patient had a lot of crowding in the lower, well-aligned upper arches. And, she wasn't too keen on extraction to begin with. But when we looked at two plans again here. So the IPR was amounting to almost 5.5. This is like you're filing all your contracts, which I'm not very comfortable with. And we got a plan with extraction wherein you could avoid all the other IPR. And she did not have very healthy lower incisors to begin with. So we opted to go with the lower incisor extraction plan, and that's a progress case again. So this is aligner 9. Now, if it's especially a crowded incisor, the space actually closes up pretty fast. And because it's a front extraction, the patients are usually more compliant when they're wearing their aligners. And she had a severely rotated lower left second premolar. And so at some point we decided that we would do some auxiliary mechanics. We do a lot of auxiliary mechanics because, for example, if you have one severely rotated tooth, you don't want to spend 20 or 30 aligners just to help correct that. And that also may not do the job. So you could use buttons and E-chains. In some cases for crossbite correction, you could use crossbite elastics. And you can achieve the movement much faster and save time for you and your patient. Do we do Invisalign for children? Yes. But you have to be very picky when you're choosing your patients who are children for Invisalign, because all may not be as compliant, and you need to have a chat with them and the parent to understand if the child would be disciplined about wearing it. There are many benefits because they don't have any issues with their eating, with brushing is easier, they don't have to see you as often, with kids being more busy than adults. That's a big plus. But you need to get a feel of how compliant the child would be. Now, this is like a class 2 case, and I started this before the mandibular advancement feature of Invisalign had been introduced. It was not severely class 2. We thought we were going to do class 2 elastics with aligner. And this is how he looked at refinement at the end of 18 aligners. And this is how you use class 2 elastics. Like I said, you can put a button. We put a button for him in the lower, and we use the hook on the upper to use the class 2 elastics. So every time the patient removes the aligner, they have to remove the elastics and then put them back on. So you do need a fair bit of compliance with elastics as well. With every case, you can also open a Bolton analysis chart just to show you that sometimes when you need to figure out if you need to do any IPR or if there's any Bolton discrepancy, you can actually open the Bolton analysis. Now, that was a comparison of the step. There was some degree of reduction of the ND angle at refinement, and this was post-treatment. So we achieved full correction of canine relation and molar relation, and reduction in the overjet and the overbite. His arches were not too crowded to begin with, but we saw a fair change in his facial profile. And obviously, he also grew, but the elastics helped us with the correction. And he was a fairly compliant patient, and so that helped. This case of mine was recently just published in the clinical newsletter in May, so just the same one. So this was the old way, and of course, I still do a lot of twin blocks for the much younger kids. But now what are we inching towards? So when I did this patient, I used class 2 elastics because I did not, it was not a very severe class 2 anyways to begin with, and we did not have any other way except using a twin block or a fixed functional appliance. So what is the new way? Now that is the mandibular advancement feature of the Invisalign. So other than being just an aligner, this also gives you an option to use something like a twin block or a functional appliance for your patients along with aligning their teeth. This is obviously for growing patients. So this is a single appliance solution which helps to correct class 2. It is simple, it's efficient, and it's patient friendly. A lot of my patients don't wear their twin blocks. Obviously, we all know there's some amount of speech distortion that happens initially. There are very compliant patients, but there are equal number of patients who are not compliant because of the visibility, because of the speech, and this could be a good alternative for the patients requiring mandibular advancement along with alignment or other corrections. So how does this work? You have these wings which are placed on the buccal side of the regular aligners, and this is made again from smart track material, but it is strengthened with a special design that reinforces the structure and doesn't let the wings break easily or get distorted. There's a minimal interarch opening that is there, and there's a raised gingival cut line which ensures the patient comfort. So there's not a big amount of mouth opening, but there is the progression is done in steps, not in one go. So when the patient occludes in the forward position, the precision wings engage advancing and holding the mandible in a forward position. So this advancement, depending on case to case, but it's done in minimum 2 or 3 steps. So you don't make the patient jump from full class 2 to full class 1 in one step. Like in a twin block, we sometimes do phased advancement. What is the advantage that this have over a regular removable functional appliance is, along with the mandibular advancement, it also simultaneously aligns and levels the teeth. So the patient sees an improvement in the smile, which doesn't happen with twin block because you're only doing mandibular advancement. You're not doing any alignment. So this helps to, in a way, reduce your treatment time because you're doing dental as well as skeletal correction simultaneously. But you can only order this as part of a comprehensive plan with Invisalign. So we already discussed the differences, but of course, twin block is more bulky compared to the MA. There could be speech impairment that's more visible compared to the MA. There's no simultaneous alignment in twin block. And if it's a class 2 div 2 case, with a twin block, you would need to procline your incisors and get an overjet before you do so you may not need a phase 1 before you give a twin block. In MA also, if it's a class 2 case, you need to first create a positive overjet, which can be done with the Invisalign, the regular Invisalign, and then you move to the MA phase, which is the mandibular advancement phase 4. So it's one appliance which is doing all of this, right? You don't need two different appliances for this. So a case with mandibular advancement, deep bite, increased overjet, and a narrow maxillary arch. So this is a full, almost like a full class 2 and a skeletal class 2. That's the aligners in the mouth, and that's the post-treatment. So, but again, you can only do this if the patient is compliant. Invisalign or any aligner system works on patient compliance. If this team was not compliant, we wouldn't get this result. And not just for mandibular advancement, for any case. But if, on the other hand, you look at twin blocks, they also work only if the patient is compliant. I see the compliance is better if I compare a twin block with a mandibular advancement, primarily because of the less visibility and the speech issue not being there. So there was a reduction in the A and B angle, and again, was not a very highly increased A and B, but at the same time, there was a reduction. So looking at some of the advanced treatments, looking at premolar extractions, impacted canines, these are all advanced treatments. So it's best not to start with an advanced treatment if you're starting out with aligners, because you need to know and need to be familiar with your ClinCheck planning, your features, what attachments need to be there or not. But nevertheless, I mean, if you have to, you have to. But it's always better to go through a light or a moderate case before going on to an advanced case. Like I spoke to you earlier, aligners are a good option in open bite cases because they help in posterior intrusion, and there have been many studies to support this. One of my patients with an open bite by Max, 28 at the start of treatment when she started, and slight amount of class 2 as well. So this is an old patient of mine, and you see a lot of conventional attachments here. That was the treatment plan. On the left was the original plan, and on the right was at the end of the first set of aligners. You see a lot of blue and black dots. That's because it's an advanced case. And that's the right is the movement that's already happened at the end of the initial set of aligners. So what's happened is we've done extraction of 4 premolars. There has been retraction. There has been extrusion of the incisors. The lower curve of C has improved, and there has been, so that's the superimposition. So that's the amount of retraction that happened and some amount of constriction. And this was, we went through several refinements. She was a patient who was not living in Delhi, and she was going in and out. So after she was happy with the first set of aligners, and then she got a little less compliant. But we needed more settling, and we needed some class 2 elastics. We got some settling, but not too much of class 2 elastics till the end. So, but we did finish with a slightly increased overbite, and we closed all the spaces. And there was still a little refinement left, but you know, she then finally left. So just to show you one of the advanced cases, of course, we have the G6 protocol, with which we use more for the premolar extraction cases. Distalization. If you've done aligners, you may have heard that aligners again are a very good appliance for molar distalization, maybe even without the use of TADs. We know that generally if you're doing distalization, we do need to use TADs or some amount of extraoral anchorage to help with distalization, especially in adults. There have been many studies again on maxillary molar distalization, and one of the studies concluded that aligner therapy in association with composite attachments and class 2 elastics can distalize maxillary first molars by up to 2.25 millimeters without significant tipping and vertical movements in the crown, and no changes to the facial hyper reveal, because a lot of times there can be opening of the mandibular plane angle. So one of my patients in progress, again, a 31-year-old female, we planned sequential distalization, a class 2 diff to malocclusion, and she's more than a half cusp, almost like a full cusp on the left side and an end on the right. It is hard to treat a full cusp class 2, but nevertheless, we decided to try it. So this is at the end of her first set of aligners. You can appreciate the amount of bite opening. Already there's been the improvement in the inclination of the central incisors. A lot of, on the right side, she's almost fully class 1, and on the left side, she's still, now she was full class 2 on the left, but she's now an end on. And like I said, we've already distalized a lot. You still see some spaces in the upper arch because we did do a scan a little sooner than before her last aligners as she was moving. So this was on the left side is before treatment, the right side is at the second, when we were ordering for the second set of aligners. So that's the change in the bite opening, the inclinations, the molar relation. You can see some amount of open bite which is seen in progress, and eventually that settles down. You'll see some spaces in the upper still because we still have some distalization left, more so on the left side. And the lower is anyway almost done. So that's the comparison. So this was the first, and now you can see some space. So how does distalization happen is by sequentially. You don't move all the teeth at once. The last terminal molar moves about half before the first molar starts distalizing, and then the second premolar, and then the first. So it's like half-half movements, so that they use the rest of the arch as anchored. Now you see spaces mesial to the first molars and the second premolars, and then mesial to the first premolars. So the teeth are moved back one at a time, which is why distalization cases are long cases. So it's not for every patient. Every patient may not agree to a 2-year long case, but you can give them an option of a premolar extraction in the upper arch. So this is for patients who don't want any extractions, who don't mind wearing aligners for longer, and also need a lot of compliance with them wearing class 2 elastics, because that's a must for most of the distalization cases. So the molars are pitted against the rest of the arch, and they provide reciprocal anchorage. So the arch provides reciprocal anchorage. Elastics reinforce anchorage and prevent flaring of the incisors because of the opposite reaction. Aligner wear minimizes the side effects of the elastics. Some amount of upper molar rotation is built in, and expansion of arch is also built in, which helps to also open up some space. The disocclusion of the posterior teeth because of wearing aligners also helps with distalization, and the lower incisor proclination is avoided because of full coverage by the aligner, and so is the molar extrusion avoided. Another case with distalization was a simpler case of unilateral distalization in a 32-year-old female. Also, the younger these patients are, the better and the faster they track. So in her case, what happened was she had to have the upper right first molar extracted because of a tooth fracture, and so because of that, the dentist referred her to me to see if we wanted to she also wanted alignment, so if you wanted to use that space in some way. Now luckily for us, she was a class 2 on the right side, and that was the side her first molar was being extracted, and eventually she had to get an implant done. So we thought we will use some of that space and use that to distalize our canine and premolars into that space, and still leave enough space for an implant, but maybe for a smaller tooth size. So this was the projected result, and in this case, we did not plan sequential distalization, but we did en masse distalization because we were not distalizing a molar, but only the premolars, and the patient promised to be very compliant and wear class 2 elastics all the time. So this is how she looked. We achieved full class 1 canine, and the premolars also distalized at the end of set 1. In fact, she was looking almost done, but she did have some finishing left, and now she's on the finishing stage. But we've already achieved the distalization that we planned for on the right side, and also the alignment is mostly done. The implant space is maintained. So The other question a lot of people ask is, how often do you change your aligners? Some companies would tell you 2-week change. Invisalign says weekly change, but my protocol is not the same for every patient. It is anywhere between 1 week to 2 weeks. And how do I decide? Now, you need to know that for adults, they respond differently. And the younger they are, the more predictable is the movement. The older they are, the more unpredictable it could be. So for adults, I usually start with 2-week change for the first 3 aligners. This is also to observe and see how well they are wearing it and how many hours they are wearing it for. If they're compliant, then we reduce them to about 10 days change. In most cases, I keep it to 10 days change, at least for the first set of aligners. For distalization cases, because we are mostly doing single or 2 teeth movement, we do weekly changes if the patient is compliant. In very difficult cases, we could keep it to more than 10 days. Extraction cases, minimum 10 days. And then we review on follow-up appointments every 8 to 10 weeks, and we could reduce or increase number of days. Teens are definitely, the teeth movement is much faster. So first 3 aligners, I keep it for 10 days and then move it down to weekly change if the patient is wearing them very well, and review every 8 weeks. Sometimes, like I said, you also need auxiliaries with aligners. You could end up with some amount of posterior open bite, which if you want to close it faster, you could use settling elastics just with braces. And this is just an example of how to use settling elastics to finish your case faster and more predictably. Sometimes you can trim your aligners posteriorly to allow for passive settling of the occlusion. Okay, so do we have time, Saptrishi? Do you want me to speak a little bit on marketing, or should we just wrap up?
Yes, ma'am. Sure, ma'am. Can carry.
Should I go on?
Yes.
Okay, so now we're almost to the end of our lecture today. Why I put in this section is because everything we're speaking about is now digital, right? We're all sitting in our homes and there's so much time. So a little bit of what I've been trying to do, I've not been very tech savvy, but what I've done in the recent past is, what we've realized is that the younger generation or our patient base is getting younger and younger. And most of this patient base, they're always on their phones, they're always on social media, and they get a lot of information online. And you need to have your screen presence online. I know you have to do really good work. You will always get your patients, and the best way of marketing is still, word of mouth. But you also need to have an online media presence. So you need to have a digital footprint. The first thing to start with is by having a website for the doctor or the clinic. You can work on doing some search engine optimization, ask your patients to post online reviews, have a landing page on Google, of course, have an account and be active on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter if you can, and then of course LinkedIn for business profiles. You should use prioritizing Google search, Google AdWords if you want to do paid marketing. You can have testimonials and post videos on YouTube. I know a lot of people who've used the lockdown to post informational videos on YouTube, and that's a great thing because it's improving and increasing your online presence. You can write blogs, another great way to improve your social media presence. And Invisalign also helps in certain ways by giving us what is called as the doctor locator, which I would come to. So that's just a picture of my website, the front page. That's my Facebook page, Instagram, YouTube. And what is a doctor locator? So when you have an account with Invisalign, depending on what tier. So for the postgraduates who don't know much, Invisalign has a tier platform or a tier system. So as you do more and more cases, your tier goes up. Now, when a random person who's heard about Invisalign wants to go and search for a doctor, they would go on the Invisalign website and they can actually go to the doctor locator. Now, depending on your experience, you would come into one of the tiers. So if you are one of their top providers, you would come on the top. And you actually have a mark or a link here where they can directly click and request for an appointment. So another online presence, which is obviously provided by the company. Like I said, this is for the patients more than the doctors. And that's part of the digital marketing that you could do. So what are the changes? Like I said, we started with changes and how we should be open to changes in our lives, personal and professional. But for me personally, trying to move from an analog to a digital system, I have seen some changes in the last few years. I know I can see more patients in the same amount of time. there are fewer emergencies. I can work digitally even when not in the clinic. Of course, before the lockdown, I used to travel a fair bit, and I used to do all my clin check planning and treatment planning, and even sometimes virtual calls when I was not in the practice. Uh, because of doing digital scans, and we have more accurate appliance fits and less emergencies, you can even order for retainers before your patients come in. Your storage space is minimized in the practice, and even for braces patients, if you have a scanner, you can scan them before debonding and virtually remove the brackets and get retainers ready for them. So there have been a lot of multiple changes in our practice, and now with the COVID scenario, there've been even more and more of emphasis on shifting from analog to digital, and even more and more virtual. And that is how everyone around us wants it to be as well. So we have to somewhere think of what is the future and where are we going, and how can we incorporate all of this, into our practice or into the future practice. So that was obviously the old way, how we would meet our patients and, be with them. And yes, this is when I went to the practice one day to see some emergency patients, and my patient can't even recognize me. But that is the current new way. And I would just like to finish almost by telling you a little bit about digital patient monitoring. This is really big in the West. It's still not something that I've seen in India right now being done by anyone. But I just like, it's a great video. So just for everyone to see what the dental monitoring app is about. And this is probably the future as well for us. So we know that we won't experience 100 years of progress in the 21st century. It will be more like 20,000 years of progress at today's rate in terms of how the digital technology is revolutionizing everything. Orthodontics as a specialty is also somewhere echoing the sentiments of the statement today. Digital technology has gone a long way to shake up orthodontics. Practice management softwares changed our front offices, and intraoral scanners and 3D treatment plannings are now allowing us to do better treatment planning and more accurate planning. 3D printing also helps us to give an opportunity to eliminate outsourcing of our model and appliance fabrication. So the digital evolution is racing ahead. But how does an orthodontist really keep up? There's so much going on. By just dipping one toe in the water and wading in. Thank you everyone for listening to me for almost 1.5 hours and staying with me through the webinar. Thank you.